Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Aunni Young. I am the social media journalist for ASALH, and today we are celebrating the 2023 Black History Month theme, Black Resistance. I have here with me Dr. Zebulon Miletsky. He is the chair for the PR and Marketing Committee and a member of the Executive Council. Zeb, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm so well. I'm so glad to be on with you and to see you, Aunni.
You too. Good to see you. Glad to have you
Good.
back for another fireside chat.
Right, right. Yes, yeah, indeed it is, and it's a timely one is at that.
Yes, it is. It is. And we are discovering all the many ways that African Americans have resisted in the past,
Yes.
today, and how we may resist in the future to benefit our race. And so I wanted you to lead the discussion on what do you believe is a very important aspect of Black resistance as it relates to our culture and our history.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that when you use a word like resistance, it brings up a question mark in some people's minds, like, wow, Black resistance. And what I'm finding very interesting is
Mhm.
how it's being interpreted and how it's being received by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. Some people are seeing it in various ways in terms of, how their organizations resisted, how their own families resisted. People are sharing their personal narratives about, some of the ways in which they see resistance, either through, again, an organization or through a movement or through just somebody. And people are being creative with the idea of Black resistance. How do you resist in the military? How can you resist in uh, working for public services or human working with people? Um,
Mhm.
uh, uh, so it's not just the traditional kind of ways one that come to mind immediately. We know about the civil rights movement and organizers and people who resisted in that way. We know about people who resisted way back in the 1940s, the 50s, um, you know, early on, taking a stand, maybe even just, you know, either personally or collectively, no, no, I'm not going to be moved. I will register to vote. Knowing their rights. So many ways in which people have resisted and what Black resistance can mean. Um, and it's also, you know, even going back to thinking about other ways in which, like, even people who were in real difficult situations found little ways to resist. If they were, working either like, in a collective kind of sense, finding ways to slow down the work through song, you know, uh, using song and using poetry and so on to signify like ways to find freedom and stuff. All of that stuff is resistance, breaking, maybe the tools that were needed that day were missing or moved, there's ways to slow down, there's ways to resist all kinds of different ways in every situation. And that's a valuable lesson for right now because there's a lot going on in the world.
Well, when we speak to the history of resisting, and, I was telling you about some of the statistics I pulled up, we have one thing going on where through chattel breeding, Black women being forced to breed and to create a slave labor that fueled the cotton industry just alone. And so that one statistic says that 80% of the world's cotton was being produced out of the US. And that 1.8 million slaves were producing cotton by 1850, and there were 3.2 million enslaved people in the country in 15 states, slave states. So you have Black people being forced to breed, and you have actually where race was determined in the womb of a Black woman. For example, if the slave master was white, obviously, and he had a child with a slave woman, then we had to decide then what type of human was coming out of the womb of the Black woman. Was it a white child or was it a Black child? And of course, it took on the race of the mother, and the child was considered Black, increasing the
That's right.
slave labor. And
That's
so,
right.
based upon all of the breeding, Blacks fueling the economy through their slave labor, making the United States a prosperous country and a global power through our labor, period. I think Blacks then realized how important it was to continue to resist in our country. And I'm
Yeah.
very passionate about, you know, how women suffered and struggled through the breeding process that led to realizing we have to resist here in this country so that we could have freedom and all our unalienable rights, if you will.
Oh yeah, well put, Aunni. I think you were picking up where I was going, what I was thinking about. We didn't mention the word slavery. Nobody mentioned, but that's what I was thinking about too. And and you're absolutely right to go that far back with it, to go there, because how can we ignore the greatest crime, of the ages, and it's up there with some of the worst kind of acts of evil against a particular group of people or one particular race.
Right.
And and uh and so I think it's okay. It's sort of the elephant in the room, I guess. For when you say Black resistance, I think a lot of our minds go back to those days, and that those trials and tribulations, the struggles that were involved, that people still do remember and do talk about. And you cited the statistics, and it tells such a story. One where the law was being used as a way to grow the enslaved population, as you pointed out.
Right.
And it has to do with how we formulate race, which you also mentioned more or less, because it's while it's somehow possible for a white woman to give birth to a white or Black child. A white woman can give birth to a Black child, a biracial child, but it is actually impossible under the American rules of law of at least tradition in terms of race, that a Black woman cannot give birth to a white child. And that's because, as you said, uh, um, going back to that experience is how we came up with that idea, that notion of the one drop rule that comes straight from slavery. You're right. The law also stated that there's a legal Latin term for it. The states that the enslaved body, as you call it, person, baby, child will take the status of the mother in particular. And that had to do with race. It also had to do with inheritance, because if you're Thomas Jefferson, if it's a child of a slave master who happens to be president, the first four presidents of the United States were, several presidents were slaveholders, then you could make a claim for inheritance if you were. So there cannot be any relationship back. You could not take the status of the father, certainly not, because in so many cases that would entitle someone to be the heir of an inheritance, and that was another way of shifting wealth. They kept wealth away from Black people, and among the various ways. So you're absolutely right. Um,
Right. Black
yes,
resistance needs
Black
to
resistance.
continue here in our country too. And the one statistic that we were able to find on how many Black babies have been aborted from 1973 to 2015, 19 million Black babies have been aborted, according to the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. And so that juxtaposition alone is that, yes, women have the right to choose, but those that created Planned Parenthood weren't necessarily on our side. And instead of offering us the opportunity to really resist through that, they're also at the same time trying to get rid of our children so that we are reducing the number of Black children in the world, in the US. And you're talking about in 1850, what did I say? 1.8 million contributed to the manufacturing of cotton. But now, years later, 19 million Black babies have been aborted from 1973 to 2015. So I wonder, how can we continue to resist in this time on the earth, in the US specifically?
Yes, yes, Aunni, you make a lot of interesting, heavy points there because, uh, and I think making the connection between the um, sheer volume of wealth that was being generated by King Cotton, as it was known. Cotton, in this country, cotton was king, and it fueled. That's how America has become. Had become one of the richest and one of the most powerful countries in one of the most shortest amount of times in history of the world. So
Right.
it was no coincidence. I don't think it's no. There's a lot of evidence to the contrary, and this is one of the things that is important about resistance because it's not just the experience of slavery, but it's I think overall too, it's the killing of the Black body, the hunting down, the sheer kind of uh, willingness to destroy it in various eras and in so many different kinds of ways, all kinds of oppression, racial terrorism,
Right.
lynching, police killings, cases of what they call race riots, but were really like, a whole bunch of people coming in and doing violence onto the Black community from outside that community, Black
Mm-hmm.
Wall Street,
Right.
so on. And so I think it smacks of a genocidal kind of one begins to wonder what is the agenda here, what is going on when we see these different statistics. I don't like to talk about abortion too much because it's such a politicized issue.
Right.
It's a very political issue, and it is nothing. It's okay. It's just that it's hard to find a lot of agreement around it, and but the point is that there has been there's no doubt that there is something we know that Black women are dying in childbirth at a much higher rate than any other group of women today.
Right.
Um, and then we know that there have been all kinds of we won't we're not going to be cynical about it, but we also could believe that these some of these things might be are the case because uh, we've seen governmental programs like that. I know in Puerto Rico, they called it La Operación, the operation, and it was a way of getting women to basically terminate, not only to terminate pregnancies, but they basically, took their ability to have children away. They would go to a hospital for a night, and came back, and they were poor, and they didn't have anyone to speak for them, and no one even told them what the purpose was. So these things do happen. These things have happened in other communities, and they've happened in our community. They've certainly happened. I know women who are Black women who are incarcerated. Also, we're seeing these kinds of things. So yes, yes, y'all, we got to put it together in our minds. You know, that long march of oppression and all a real just sort of a targeting of the Black person um, in so many different ways. The onslaught, the sheer onslaught of willingness to do wrong to the Black community, to the Black world, is something that's just striking in America, and we still see it, still seeing it today. And
Mhm.
so we have to root that kind of hatred and prejudice out where we see it, and that's also a way of resisting.